In the darkness of the 41st millennium, horror is not a stranger. Humanity has seen worlds consumed by demons, the undead walking under the banner of Nurgle, and unholy abominations forged by the warp's corruption. Yet even in this age of unending war, there exists one name whispered with a different kind of dread, a legend not born from chaos, but from something far more primal. His name is Jason Voorhees. Before the age of the Imperium, before mankind reached the stars, Jason was a mortal killer, a vengeful spirit born from cruelty, neglect, and death. The blood of Camp Crystal Lake still stains the myth of old terror's forgotten past. But myths have a way of surviving. They linger in data archives, in the sub-levels of forgotten hives, in the corrupted fragments of pre-imperial entertainment logs. When the warp tears at the fabric of reality, when nightmares bleed into existence, sometimes those myths find flesh again. It began on a dead world in the Segmentum Obscurus, designation Crith 9. Once a thriving mining colony, Crith 9 was abandoned after an outbreak of warp-related psychosis. Imperial forces sealed the planet, declaring it unfit for habitation. But decades later, the Mechanicus returned, driven by whispers of a powerful anomaly buried beneath the old mines. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it Project Revenant. A magos named Darnath Fexius led the expedition. His augmetic eyes glowed with crimson curiosity as he gazed upon the data recovered from ancient archives. It spoke of an entity, immortal, unkillable, sustained not by the warp, but by sheer will and vengeance. To the magos, this was no ghost story. It was a specimen. And so, against the advice of the Ordo Malleus, Fexius authorized the retrieval of the anomaly. Deep in the tunnels of Crith 9, his servitors unearthed a cryogenic chamber. The design was archaic, pre-imperial, even pre-Old Earth Federation. The Mechanicus could barely interpret the symbols etched on its surface. Crystal Lake Research Division, 21st century. Inside, frozen in stasis, was a man, massive, deformed. A mask fused to his decaying face. His heart, long dormant, began to beat again the moment the chamber's power field destabilized. When the servitors opened the chamber, the lights flickered. Vox units crackled with interference. And in the reflection of a data slate, one of the tech priests swore he saw the figure move. The first death came moments later. A servitor was found crushed, its head pulped against the wall. Another was found impaled on a length of rebar. No motion sensors detected the killer. Only one security picked feed caught a glimpse. Something large, humanoid, and silent, carrying what appeared to be a jagged piece of steel. Magos Fexius dismissed the panic as mechanical failure, until Jason Voorhees walked into the command chamber. No sound, no words, only the dragging scrape of his improvised machete against the steel floor. The guards opened fire. Bolts tore through him, shredding muscle and bone. He fell, only to rise again, slower, deliberate, unstoppable. Fexius screamed orders, sealing bulkheads, deploying plasma servitors, even invoking a low-level exorcism rite. None of it mattered. Jason tore through them as though their weapons were toys, flesh or machine. It made no difference. When it was done, the only sound left on Crith 9 was the drip of blood echoing down the corridors. Word of the massacre reached the Inquisition. The Ordo Xenos, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Sepulturum all demanded jurisdiction. But what drew the most interest was the nature of Jason's existence. He was not warp-tainted. There were no demonic signatures, no psychic disturbances. His soul, or whatever passed for it, was cold, silent, beyond the Empyrean's reach. The Inquisitor assigned to the case, Valeria Knox, theorized that Jason represented a form of post-death kinetic persistence, a human spirit so consumed by vengeance that it achieved perpetual motion beyond biological death. To her, he was proof that not all monsters required the warp to exist. To others, he was an anomaly too dangerous to study. When the Imperial Guard arrived on Krith 9 to secure the ruins, they found only corpses and a trail leading into the catacombs. Jason had vanished, but his legend had already begun to spread. On neighboring worlds, stories surfaced. Entire outposts slaughtered overnight, camps of miners massacred near lakes and rivers. Always the same pattern, always the same silence. It wasn't long before the Chaos Gods took notice. To Khorne, Jason was a creature of pure slaughter, worthy of admiration. To Nurgle, he was decay incarnate, yet none could claim him. He served no master. He killed not for pleasure or faith, but for compulsion. His rage had no banner. When a small cult of Khornate warriors tried to summon him, they expected a servant. What they got was extinction. Jason emerged from the warp tear, blood steaming off his body, and in minutes, the cult's altar was drowned in their own gore. The summoning circle burned itself out, and Jason vanished again into the void. The Adeptus Astartes learned of him next. A Death Watch kill team, veterans of the Tyranid Wars, tracked his energy trail to an abandoned agri-world. They came prepared with melter charges, flamers, and psychers trained in soul binding. Their Auspex scanners registered movement everywhere, but every time they turned, the readings shifted. He was toying with them. When Jason struck, it was not with speed, but inevitability. He tore through ceramite like parchment. The Deathwatch librarian tried to banish him through psychic fire, but Jason's body refused to burn. His soul was too distant to grasp. One by one, the Astartes fell, their blood soaking the soil of that forgotten planet. Only one survivor was retrieved, a grievously wounded veteran who, before dying, spoke a single word: unkillable. Inquisitor Nox classified the entity as Class Primus Nihilus. Her report warned that Jason's existence could destabilize the Imperium's understanding of death and resurrection. If one human could resist both warp corruption and biological decay, what did that mean for the Emperor's design? Was Jason a fluke or a reflection of what humanity could become if stripped of all morality and hope? Rumors began to spread through the hive cities. Workers whispered of the Mask of the Lake, a spirit who came for the wicked at night. On penal worlds, prisoners claimed to see him stalking the perimeter, his machete glinting under the moons. Even the ecclesiarchy began preaching sermons of caution. Fear not the demon, for faith can repel it. But fear the man who cannot die, for even the Emperor's light cannot find him. Across the Imperium, Jason Voorhees had become more than a myth. He was a phenomenon, a horror from the past, reborn in an age of steel and madness. His body defied reason. His silence defied comprehension. And somewhere, deep beneath the crust of a new world, a lake shimmered with unnatural stillness. Beneath its surface, chains rattled. A mask stirred. The curse of Camp Crystal Lake was not bound to Earth anymore. It had found a new hunting ground among the stars. In the grim darkness of the far future, even the undead have evolved. And as the Emperor's light shines upon 10,000 worlds, one shadow still walks among them, wordless, relentless, eternal. The galaxy would soon learn that death itself was not enough to stop Jason Voorhees. The story of Jason Voorhees in the 41st millennium was dismissed by many as superstition. Administratum scribes labeled it mass hysteria, born from trauma. the kind that lingers in frontier colonies long cut off from the Astronomican's guiding light. But those who had seen him knew better. There were no demons in his eyes, no glow of psychic corruption, just emptiness, the hollow reflection of violence without end. Inquisitor Valeria Knox refused to let the phenomenon fade into rumor. She assembled a task force drawn from the Ordo Malleus and the Adeptus Mechanicus to investigate reports of Jason's reappearance. They traced his path to a frontier moon known as Darren IV, a once lush world now reduced to silence. The last Vox transmission from its surface consisted of only 3 words: "He found us." The strike cruiser Penance of Dawn descended through thick fog as orbital scans revealed entire settlements missing, their structures intact but devoid of life. No corpses, no signs of struggle, just absence. It was as though the inhabitants had simply ceased to exist. The investigation team established a perimeter near an abandoned lake, a mirror-like expanse surrounded by dead trees and rusting manufactoria ruins. As they deployed servo skulls and auspex beacons, one of the tech priests, Magos Helrain, noticed something uncanny in the data feed. The temperature around the lake was dropping fast. "Atmospheric anomaly," Helrain muttered. "Localized cold front, radius 300 meters." But Inquisitor Knox felt something deeper. Not warp corruption, but the kind of dread that seeps into the bones. Her psychic senses reached out and met only void. It was as if the space before her refused to echo back. Moments later, a perimeter alarm screamed. Motion detected 30 meters to the east. The stormtroopers raised their hellguns, scanning the fog. Nothing. Then, another reading, this time behind them. Still nothing. The Vox static deepened. Through the distortion came a sound no one expected. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps, the kind that crushed leaves and metal alike. The fog parted, and Jason Voorhees stepped forward. Even augmented eyes could barely register his approach. His body, though scarred and burned, was solid, real. His mask, dented and cracked, gleamed faintly beneath Darren IV's pale moonlight. The soldiers opened fire instantly. Last bolts struck his torso, searing flesh, but he didn't stop. One trooper screamed as Jason appeared behind him without a sound, snapping his neck in a single movement. Another tried to activate a plasma grenade, but Jason crushed his arm before he could detonate it. The explosion tore through the clearing, engulfing Jason in blue fire. When the smoke cleared, he was still standing. Inquisitor Knox shouted orders for retreat, but Jason's machete found her first officer cleaving through armor and bone with terrifying precision. Every swing of his blade felt deliberate, ritualistic, an act of inevitability rather than rage. The survivors fell back toward the lake, their boots sinking into the mud. Then Jason stopped. For the first time, his head tilted, not toward them, but toward the water, as though something called to him from beneath the surface. Helrain seized the moment. He activated a containment sigil, projecting an energy lattice designed to trap warp entities. The field crackled around Jason, locking him in a cage of burning light. The air itself shivered from the energy discharge. For a moment, it worked. Jason stood still, staring through the lattice as though analyzing it. His body twitched, his muscles tightening unnaturally. Then the lattice fractured, the sigil's power core overloaded, bursting in a cascade of sparks. Jason took a step forward, then another. Helrain screamed as Jason's machete pierced his chest. The Mago's blood hissed as it struck the ground. Before dying, Helrain whispered one final phrase. "He's learning." Knox and the few remaining soldiers fled into the transport shuttle, lifting off as Jason disappeared once again into the mist. From orbit, they bombarded the site with incendiary warheads, reducing the lake and surrounding ruins to molten glass. But Jason was gone. Weeks later, the Penance of Dawn intercepted an astropathic distress signal from a pilgrim vessel. The ship's crew reported a stowaway, a silent figure wearing a mask, moving through the ventilation shafts. The message cut off mid-sentence. When the vessel was found adrift near the Cadian Gate, every life aboard had been extinguished. The Inquisition moved to quarantine the area, but something strange occurred. Imperial Navy Auspex logs detected a brief power surge within the Geller field of the Penance of Dawn. For an instant, the ship's protection from the warp flickered, and within that moment, Jason Voorhees appeared on board. He moved through the corridors with ghost-like precision. The ship's servitors and soldiers alike fell, one by one, without triggering alarms. By the time Inquisitor Nox realized he was there, half her crew was gone. In a desperate gambit, she ordered the ship's navigator to drop into real space near an uninhabited world. The sudden re-entry tore half the hull apart, flinging debris across orbit. Jason was last seen standing on the observation deck as the viewport shattered, his body drawn into the void. They thought it was over, but Jason Voorhees did not die in vacuum. Somehow, impossibly, he reappeared on the planet below, intact. His physiology defied every natural law. His cells did not decay. His body required no oxygen. He was not alive, but neither was he truly dead. Over time, the Mechanicus classified him as Anomaly X221, the Revenant entity. Forbidden records described his molecular structure as self-repairing necro-flesh, bound by non-warp kinetic energy. Simply put, Jason could not be destroyed by known means. As centuries passed, the myth of Jason Voorhees spread across the Imperium. Worlds far from each other spoke the same words: the silent killer, the masked death, the lake's shadow. The cults of Khorne began to mimic his methods, wearing crude masks in battle to emulate his wrath. The Inquisition executed thousands in an effort to purge these imitators, but the truth remained. Jason was still out there, and the warp had begun to take notice once again. In the Eye of Terror, Slaaneish's demons whispered of a creature who killed without passion. To them, he was fascinating, a mortal who embodied endless death without joy or art. Khorne's champions sought him, hoping to claim his skull for the Skull Throne. Yet none ever returned, for Jason Voorhees had become more than a legend. He was evolution, the perfect engine of murder, immune to temptation, immune to reason. Inquisitor Nox, now aged and weary, recorded her final thoughts in a sealed log before vanishing herself. We thought Jason Voorhees was an echo of the past, a remnant of mankind's primitive fears, but perhaps he is its future, a being beyond morality, beyond death, the embodiment of humanity's most primal truth, that violence never dies, it only waits. Her ship was found drifting years later. No bodies, only a single mask resting on the command chair. Somewhere beyond the Astronomican's light, beneath an alien moon, a lake shimmered once again. Ripples disturbed its surface as a figure emerged, silent, patient, eternal. The galaxy had not seen the last of Jason Voorhees. Across the Imperium, the stories became impossible to ignore. Reports poured in from the eastern fringe to the Segmentum Pacificus, isolated colonies found drenched in blood, entire outposts wiped out overnight with no sign of struggle or resistance. Vox recordings recovered from these sites were always brief, often ending mid-breath, mid-scream, or with the sound of heavy footsteps approaching through static. The Inquisition had a name for him now. Subject Revenant 01. Jason Voorhees had become a classified cosmic anomaly, but bureaucracy could not contain the scope of his terror. For every file sealed by the Ordo Malleus, a new report surfaced. For every destroyed world, another whispered his name. The Mechanicus believed Jason's body had adapted to the environments of the 41st millennium. His regenerative properties, part biological, part metaphysical, had evolved far beyond what Magos Vexius had once imagined. He could survive vacuum, radiation, plasma fire. Even dismemberment proved temporary. When his body was torn apart, he would simply return, rebuilt by the same unseen force that had carried him across galaxies. To understand this, a desperate coalition was formed. The Inquisition, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and a detachment of Grey Knights united under a secret directive, Operation Crystal Requiem. Their goal was not to destroy Jason Voorhees, but to capture him, if possible, and study the secret of his immortality. The operation's staging ground was the industrial moon of Carthos Five, a desolate place with no population and minimal warp interference. The Grey Knights constructed a psychic containment fortress there, woven with sigils of warding and reinforced by hex steel blessed in the Emperor's name. Every corridor was sanctified, every door sealed with purity runes. The plan was simple. Bait Jason with psychic energy. A psyker of the Scholastica Psychana volunteered to serve as the lure. Her name was Seraphine Hale, a gifted but unstable telepath. She could project her consciousness deep into the warp and call forth entities that even demons hesitated to approach. She sat within the fortress's central chamber, surrounded by chanting Grey Knights, her voice low and trembling as she began the ritual. At first, nothing happened. Then, the lights dimmed. The air temperature fell. Static filled the Vox relays. Across the moon's barren plains, seismic sensors detected rhythmic impacts, like footsteps echoing across kilometers of stone. Jason Voorhees had heard the call. The outer watchtowers were the first to fall. Monitors captured flashes of movement, something massive, moving through the dust storms, immune to last fire and autocannon bursts. A squad of servitors tried to block the entry gate. Seconds later, the feed cut out. When backup pick captures came online, the gate was gone. So were the servitors. Inside the fortress, Seraphine's eyes rolled back. "He's not in the warp," she whispered. "He's outside it. Cold. So cold." The chamber doors shook under an impact. The Grey Knights formed a barrier line. Storm bolters trained forward. Another impact, then another. The steel split. Jason tore through it, stepping into the sanctified light as smoke and flames swirled around him. His body still bore the scars of his many deaths, bullet holes, plasma burns, fractures, but he did not falter. Fire! The chamber exploded with gunfire. Bolts ripped through his chest, detonating chunks of flesh, but the wounds closed almost instantly. Jason advanced, each step deliberate, unstoppable. A Justicar charged forward with a Nemesis Force sword, the blade glowing with psychic flame. He struck deep, cleaving through Jason's abdomen, and for a moment, the killer stopped moving. The Justicar pressed harder, chanting a banishment prayer. The blade began to hum as warp energy burned through Jason's core. But then, impossibly, Jason reached out and grabbed the blade with his bare hand. The psychic flame flared and dimmed. The weapon's power died, its runes turning black. The Justicar gasped as Jason drove the same sword through his chest. The fortress descended into chaos. The psychic wards began to fail, their power flickering like dying candles. Jason's presence wasn't just physical, it corrupted silence itself. Vox relays stopped transmitting. Auspex scanners froze. Even the warp went quiet around him. Seraphine Hale screamed, her voice merging with the static. He's feeding on them. Not souls. Fear. Jason turned toward her. Their eyes met, the unholy void of his mask staring into the burning blue of her psychic vision. She saw flashes. His past, his deaths, his resurrections, his endless pain. Each time he died, something pulled him back. Not the warp, not divinity, but the universe itself, refusing to let him rest. Seraphine collapsed. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Jason standing over her, the shattered blade still in his hand. When the Inquisition arrived hours later, they found only ruins. The fortress had been torn apart from within, its walls scorched by energy readings that defied categorization. Of the Grey Knights, none survived. The Psyker's body was gone. Only the words carved into the floor remained, burned deep into the metal by impossible heat. He never dies. Jason Voorhees was gone once more. But he didn't vanish into silence this time. Days later, Imperial outposts across 3 neighboring systems began reporting identical murders. Same precision, same brutality, as though he had split himself, manifesting in multiple places at once. The Adeptus Mechanicus proposed a horrifying theory. Jason's curse had evolved into a self-replicating quantum phenomenon, a murder resonance capable of existing across multiple coordinates simultaneously. Wherever the myth of Jason Voorhees was believed, he could appear. To test this, the Mechanicus ordered all data regarding Subject Revenant 01 to be purged. The Ordo Malleus sanctioned Exterminatus on Carthos 5, reducing the moon to ash. Every record, every image, every name was destroyed. And still, the killings continued. On the hive world of Vortan Prime, a manufactorum reported hundreds dead in a single night. On a rogue trader vessel in the Jericho Reach, a masked figure was seen standing silently in the cargo bay before the ship's Geller field failed. Even the orcs began telling tales of a silent Humi, a warrior who don't die, just keep chopping. Across the stars, Jason Voorhees had become something far worse than human. He was a contagion of fear, a meme made flesh, feeding on legend, spreading through whispers and belief. The more the Imperium tried to erase him, the more powerful he became. And then came the event that changed everything. A Chaos Warband dedicated to Khorne launched an assault on a forge world near the Maelstrom. In the midst of their slaughter, they invoked the Blood God's name, demanding the strength of all who had ever killed in rage. But something else answered. The ground split open. From the chasm rose a figure drenched in black fire. Not demon, not mortal, masked, silent, carrying a blade of molten steel. Even the Khornati champion, a creature of centuries of slaughter, faltered as Jason Voorhees stepped into view. He moved without haste, carving through the berserkers like they were nothing more than shadows. Blood fell like rain, and Khorne's warriors screamed not in glory, but in fear. For the first time in 10,000 years, a demon prince tried to flee the battlefield. Jason's machete caught him mid-flight, severing his wings in one clean stroke. The demon's essence disintegrated into ash. When the battle ended, the Forge world was silent. The Chaos Warband had been annihilated, and at the heart of the carnage, a single mask remained, sinking slowly into a pool of cooling blood. The Imperium would later call it the Vortan Massacre, but to those who survived to tell the tale, it was something else, a warning. Jason Voorhees had become more than myth, more than monster. He was now a force of nature, an eternal constant in a galaxy defined by death. And even the gods of the warp were beginning to fear him. In the aftermath of the Vortan massacre, the Imperium reeled in disbelief. A single entity, one man, if he could still be called that, had decimated an entire Chaos warband and a demon prince. The Magi of Mars debated for years whether it had truly happened or if it was an elaborate fabrication, some form of psychic hallucination shared across a battlefield. But those who saw it firsthand, those few who survived, knew the truth. Jason Voorhees had transcended horror. He had become a constant. The Inquisition convened an emergency summit aboard the battle station Eternum Vigil. Representatives from the Ordo Malleus, Ordo Xenos, and even the Ordo Chronos gathered to decide how to proceed. At the head of the chamber, Inquisitor Lord Thane, flanked by robed magi and psychic advisors, replayed the fragmentary footage of the massacre. Grainy picked feeds showed the impossible. Jason's figure emerging from warp flame, unmarked by its corruption, killing demons whose essence should have been untouchable by mortal hands. "This is not a demon," Thane said grimly. "This is not warp energy. It's something older." Magos Lyrics of Mars adjusted his vocal filters, his mechadendrites twitching with unease. "Older than the warp?" he rasped. "Impossible. The warp is eternity, eternity bends," replied Thane, "and Jason Voorhees may be proof that it can break." The debate raged for hours. Some believed Jason was an emergent fragment of the machine god's will, a manifestation of punishment. Others claimed he was a warp void given form, a paradox born of humanity's collective memory of death. Yet amidst all the theories, one fact could not be denied. Jason was spreading. Reports now came from the eastern fringe, the halo stars, even the edges of Ultramar. Each case bore the same marks: vanished settlements, motionless picked records, pools of blood that defied coagulation, no communications, no survivors, only silence. But something new began to emerge. Jason's appearances were no longer random. His movements formed a pattern, a spiral centered on a single world. Cadia Secundus, the reconstructed fortress planet, born from the ashes of the original Cadia. It was here that the Inquisition decided to confront him directly. Cadia Secundus was one of the most heavily defended planets in the Imperium, its skies lined with orbital batteries and its surface bristling with bastions of the Astra Militarum. Inquisitor Thane arrived with 3 regiments, 2 Titan escorts, and a full company of Grey Knights under Brother Captain Malchior. Their mission? Containment, not destruction. Thane's plan was to trap Jason within a psychic labyrinth, a network of soul-binding fields designed to disorient and confine any being not anchored to the warp. The Mechanicus had built the labyrinth beneath Cadia Secundus's equatorial fortress, sealing its chambers with gravitic locks and null fields. No demon could enter, no mortal could leave. And in the heart of that labyrinth, they built a lake, artificial, still, a mirror of the one from Terra's long-forgotten past. Jason Voorhees would come. They waited 6 weeks before the first signs appeared. Vox interference, drops in temperature, power surges in the labyrinth's outer rings. Then came the smell, metallic, heavy, like rust and blood. The guards stationed near the lake reported whispers over the comms, echoes of laughter, splashes in the water when nothing moved. Then, one night, the entire fortress went dark. Emergency lights flared to life, painting the halls in crimson as alarms screamed. Thane's command center filled with distortion. Through the static, a voice came. Not words, but breathing. Heavy, slow, mechanical. He was inside. The first containment team found him near the water's edge. Jason stood motionless, staring into his reflection. For a heartbeat, they thought he would remain still forever. Then, without warning, he turned, and the massacre began. The soldiers fired volleys of plasma and bolt fire, but Jason moved with uncanny precision, his every strike final. He didn't charge, he didn't run, he simply appeared, a step ahead of where death should have reached him. A Titan's plasma cannon fired directly into his path, reducing the chamber to ash. When the smoke cleared, he was gone. A moment later, he was behind them. Captain Malchior himself led the counterattack, invoking the Emperor's name as psychic lightning arced across his armor. "You are no god, creature," he roared, "and no god can save you from his light." Jason turned slowly, his cracked mask reflecting the glow of the Grey Knight's halo. For a moment, they stood face to face, divine purpose against eternal rage. Malchior struck, his nemesis blade humming with sanctified fire. It cut deep, severing Jason's arm cleanly. The limb fell to the ground with a wet thud. Jason looked down at the wound. Then, before the Grey Knight's eyes, the flesh began to reform. The arm reattached itself, the torn tissue knitting like molten iron cooling into shape. Malchior struck again and again, but the creature refused to fall. When Jason's machete came down, it shattered the Grey Knight's armor like glass. The last thing Malchior saw was his own reflection in that mask. Empty, infinite. By dawn, Cadia Secundus was burning. Inquisitor Thane ordered an immediate evacuation, his voice shaking as he transmitted a final message to Terra. The labyrinth failed. The fields failed. Faith failed. He cannot be bound by science or sanctity. Whatever he is not of this galaxy's design. The fortress collapsed into the lake, its foundations sinking beneath waves that now boiled with crimson light. When the smoke cleared, Jason was gone once more. Only the mask remained, floating on the surface. The Mechanicus retrieved it for study, sealing it within a stasis vault aboard the Arc Mechanicus Tir Valorum. But the moment they attempted to scan it, their systems crashed. One engine seer reported hearing whispers emanating from the containment glass, soft, deliberate, repeating the same words in binary. "You should not have looked." Within days, every crew member aboard the Tir Valorum was dead. The ship drifted silently through the void, its beacon transmitting one final message before vanishing into the warp. He's inside the machine. The realization came too late. Jason Voorhees had adapted once again, no longer confined to flesh, no longer bound to place. His curse had infected the noosphere, the digital mindscape of the Adeptus Mechanicus. His essence, once a human soul, now existed as corrupted code, able to traverse the Mechanicus data network, jumping from ship to ship, world to world. And wherever the data spread, death followed. Entire Forge worlds went offline, their manufactoria running wild, servitors slaughtering their masters. Vox logs captured fragments of his distorted breathing echoing through machine prayer. The Adeptus Mechanicus began to call him the silent algorithm. Jason Voorhees was no longer a man. He was a virus written in blood, a paradox encoded into the Imperium's very infrastructure. But there was still one place he had not reached, the warp itself, or so they believed. For beyond the veil, in the eye of terror, something ancient stirred. Demon princes, who had once mocked his name, now trembled. Khorne's endless pit of skulls began to quake as a new resonance pulsed through the Imperium. Something cold, lifeless, yet real. The warp had always been emotion made flesh, but Jason Voorhees carried no emotion, no hate, no rage, no faith. He was the absence of it, and now the warp itself was beginning to feel fear. In the aftermath of the massacre on Armageddon's forgotten frontier, the legend of the masked giant spread across Imperial channels like a plague of whispers. At first, the Inquisition dismissed it as superstition, a tale born from the trauma of shell-shocked guardsmen. But when picked recordings began to circulate, showing a towering figure in rusted armor standing over the corpses of chaos cultists and loyalists alike, attention turned swiftly to fear. The being's unyielding silence, the archaic weapon he carried, a massive, blood-stained machete, and the fact that he seemed impervious to small arms fire, all pointed towards something that should not exist in this reality. Something wrong. It was Ordo Malleus that took the first serious interest. The demon hunters. They had seen monsters before, entities that wore flesh like a disguise, horrors that mocked the laws of life and death. But this was different. There was no warp signature, no psychic trace, no demonic aura. The figure's essence was utterly void. Even the most sensitive psychers reported nothing when attempting to probe his mind, only an unbearable cold, like staring into an empty grave. And yet, the killings continued. Entire patrols went missing in forests and ruins. Camps were found littered with bodies, each slain with surgical brutality. No message, no motive, no pattern of allegiance. Jason Voorhees, as the recovered data slate from the crashed Mechanicus transport named him, was neither servant of chaos nor pawn of the warp. He was, in a way, purer than either. Death for its own sake. When the Inquisition finally dispatched a kill team to investigate, they found the remnants of his presence near an abandoned Imperial colony. It was a ghost town, half sunk in mud and silence. The team's auspex picked up faint movement. They advanced in formation, bolters raised, and within minutes, they were gone. The only surviving fragment was a helmet cam feed, blurred images of a hulking shape emerging from fog, heavy breathing, screams, and then static. The footage was reviewed hundreds of times by the Inquisition's analysts. What unsettled them most wasn't the brutality, it was the familiarity. Jason didn't act like a demonic entity or a Xenos predator. His motions were deliberate, almost methodical. There was intelligence in his savagery. Not strategic, but ritualistic, as if he was trapped in a cycle he could never escape, doomed to repeat the same massacre until the stars burned out. And this cycle began to attract attention from darker corners of the galaxy. Across the Eye of Terror, whispers reached the ears of Chaos. Khorne, the blood god, was the first to take notice. The butcher's nail that bound his followers to endless slaughter resonated faintly with this new entity, this creature that killed without offering souls to the gods. Jason's existence was an insult to Khorne's creed. Endless murder without worship, endless violence without tribute. The World Eaters, desperate to please their god, sought to hunt him. They believed him a rival avatar of slaughter, a challenge sent by Khorne himself. Their ships tore through the void, descending upon the same cursed moon where the Inquisition had last tracked Jason's signal. When they landed, the World Eaters laughed at the notion of fear. The air was thick with fog, and the soil was soaked with congealed blood. They advanced in packs, chains wards roaring, and one by one they began to vanish. The first kill was fast. A Marine impaled through his power armor, his helmet split in half by impossible force. The others opened fire, but Jason did not fall. He moved through bolter rounds like a ghost through smoke. Every blow he struck cracked ceramite and bone alike. Every scream was swallowed by the night. By dawn, the moon was silent again. Only Jason remained, standing among the wreckage of Khorne's chosen. His mask was cracked, his clothing shredded, but he still breathed. His machete hung from his hand, dripping with the blood of demigods. Somewhere deep within the warp, Khorne roared in fury. For the first time in aeons, his faithful had been butchered by something that offered him nothing. No praise, no tribute, just silence. And that silence was a blasphemy. But Jason did not understand blasphemy. He did not understand gods or vengeance. His mind, if it could be called that, was a void shaped by one command: kill. His curse had transcended reality itself, following him even here to a galaxy where death was already a language everyone spoke fluently. Soon, the other Chaos powers began to take interest. Nurgle's servants saw him as a failed creation, a corpse that refused the natural beauty of decay. Tzeentch's followers feared him, for his existence could not be predicted or manipulated. He was immune to change, locked in a single, eternal truth. And Slaanesh found fascination in him. The Prince of Excess saw beauty in the simplicity of his purpose, the ecstasy of pure, unfiltered violence. An unholy bidding war began. Demons whispered promises into the void, hoping to sway Jason's will. Yet he never listened. No voice of gods or mortals could pierce his silence. He was a black hole in the warp, consuming fear, pain, and worship alike. Meanwhile, across Imperial space, the Adeptus Mechanicus had recovered fragments of his DNA. They were fascinated by it, a biological impossibility. The tissue samples refused to degrade even under the most extreme tests. No virus, no fire, no void exposure could destroy them. One Magos even theorized that Jason represented a form of living necromechanic equilibrium, a fusion of death and persistence that defied all logic. The Mechanicus attempted to clone the sample to recreate the phenomenon. Every experiment ended in disaster. The cloned subjects would rise, scream, and then tear themselves apart as if consumed by unseen torment. The research station conducting these tests vanished soon after, leaving behind only a single message burned into the metal walls: "He is coming." By the time word reached Terra, the myth had evolved into dread prophecy. Scholars began whispering of a figure that would walk the void at the end of days, a silent executioner untouched by chaos or faith, a reaper of both sinners and saints. But perhaps the most terrifying revelation came from the Grey Knights. During a cleansing operation on Cadia's ruins, one battle brother encountered Jason directly. The encounter was brief but catastrophic. Psychic wards failed to detect him until he was already inside the perimeter. The Grey Knight's testimony, recovered from his armor's data core, described Jason as the antithesis of will. "He is not of the warp," the knight wrote. "He is what remains when the warp forgets you." And then the recording ended with static, and the sound of heavy footsteps fading into the void. Jason Voorhees, the Eternal Revenant, had now become more than a legend. He was a new constant in a universe already choking on death, a ghost that neither gods nor men could claim. And somewhere, in the haunted silence of space, his blade gleamed, waiting for the next world to find him. He was no longer a man, no longer a curse from a summer camp long forgotten. He was now something else entirely, the embodiment of death, unbound by reason, marching silently through the grim darkness of the far future. And he was only just beginning. Across the stars, the story of the silent killer began to metastasize into myth. Some called him the death that would not die, others the revenant of Terra Nullius. But among the countless worlds of the Imperium, whispers shared one unchanging description: the man in the mask. He appeared without warning, slaughtered without mercy, and vanished like a nightmare fading before dawn. Entire battalions prayed to the Emperor for deliverance, while others whispered that perhaps this was his punishment, a silent angel sent to remind humanity of its endless sins. Inquisitor Alaric Dawn of the Ordo Malleus had spent decades hunting demons across the Segmentum Obscurus, yet nothing in his long service had prepared him for Jason Voorhees. Dawn had tracked the being's trail across 7 dead worlds, each left in ruin, each bearing the same calling card: hundreds of corpses, no survivors, and no explanation. Every world's Vox record ended with the same sound: footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and then silence. The Inquisitor's mission led him to Vitrus 9, a jungle moon long abandoned after a Tyranid incursion. His ship's auspex registered faint life signs, too faint to be human, too deliberate to be natural. Dawn's kill team descended into the mists, armed with blessed bolters, psychic wards, and relics of the Golden Throne. They had faced demons, cults, even rogue Astartes, yet the fear that clawed at them in those woods felt older, primal, like the dark itself was watching. Hours passed with no contact. Then, without a sound, one of the team was simply gone. The motion scanners glitched. A scream echoed. Bolter fire erupted through the mist, short bursts, followed by wet silence. Dawn barked orders, forming a perimeter. His men obeyed, though every one of them trembled. Then he saw it. A figure stepping out from the fog, towering and slow. The broken remnants of armor clinging to a corpse-pale body. The hockey mask, cracked and filthy, glimmered faintly beneath the moonlight filtering through the canopy. The machete in his hand was caked with fresh gore. "In the Emperor's name," Dawn whispered, raising his Inferno pistol. He fired. The shot seared through Jason's chest, vaporizing flesh and bone, yet the creature didn't fall. He staggered once, looked down at the smoking wound, and took another step forward, then another. "Demon!" one of the troopers screamed, opening fire. But Jason didn't react as a demon would. There was no roar, no warp scream. He simply moved. When he reached them, the forest exploded in violence. Blades met armor, limbs tore, and the air filled with the crunch of bone. When Dawn triggered the emergency extraction beacon, only 2 hearts still beat on the planet: his and Jason's. The Inquisitor's shuttle lifted off moments before the forest ignited in an orbital bombardment. He watched from orbit as fire consumed the moon. Through the flames, for one impossible instant, he saw the figure still standing, engulfed in fire, the machete raised toward the heavens, as if defying extinction itself. Dawn lived long enough to file one final report. It was later classified as heretical by the Inquisition. The words were few, but chilling. "He is not a demon. He is not of chaos. He is not of man. He is the refusal of death, given form." That report found its way to Titan, the fortress monastery of the Grey Knights. The psychic elite debated Jason's nature in secrecy. Some argued he was a warp anomaly, a residual echo of old night. Others believed he was a weapon, perhaps an ancient experiment of the dark age of technology that achieved immortality through recursive self-resurrection. One name surfaced again and again: the Necrons. To the Ordo Xenos, Jason bore an uncanny similarity to their philosophy: death eternal, flesh as vessel, will as machine. And so, the Mechanicus dispatched an exploratory team to investigate the hypothesis. They tracked Jason's last known energy signature to an uncharted world on the edge of the Halo stars, a world where Necron tombs slept beneath the sand. When they arrived, The site was already disturbed. The tomb's gates were open, and bodies lay scattered across the dunes. Not Necron bodies, human ones. Explorators, soldiers, cultists, all torn apart. Deep within the tomb complex, the Mechanicus found signs of battle. Scarring from phase weapons, ichor from flayed ones, and drag marks leading deeper into the dark. The Magos leading the expedition recorded their final message. We have found him. He fights the undying as one of them. He cannot be killed because he does not live. The Necrons cannot understand him. They cannot control him. He is something they did not design. When Imperial contact was lost, the world was quarantined. Centuries later, long after the tomb world fell silent again, the data records would show a single image transmitted before the feed cut. Jason Voorhees standing atop a mound of shattered Necron warriors, his machete glowing with eerie green light, as if it had absorbed their necrodermis essence. From that day forward, Jason's legend changed. He was no longer just a revenant of lost Earth. He had become something far worse, an instrument of entropy that even deathless machines could not withstand. And as word of this spread, others took notice. The Harlequins of the Eldar craft worlds whispered of the Pale Beast, a being that stalked time itself. They believed him to be a living echo of she who thirsts first breath, a fragment of death that escaped Slanesh's creation. The Imperium, for all its dogma, had no answer. They could burn worlds, sanction exterminatus, call upon the wrath of the Emperor himself. And still, somewhere in the darkness, Jason would return. Because Jason Voorhees was not a creature that lived in their galaxy. He persisted within it, a wound that refused to heal, a curse that the universe itself seemed unwilling to erase. He didn't hunger for blood, not in the way mortals did. He killed because that was the only language left to him, the only purpose carved into his existence. And in a galaxy built upon endless war, that purpose found infinite ground to thrive. As millennia passed, cults began to rise around him. They called themselves the Silent Choir. Dressed in crude masks and wielding improvised blades, they worshipped Jason not as a god, but as an inevitable truth. To them, death was not to be feared. It was to be imitated. They spread across frontier worlds, slaughtering settlements in his name, leaving behind offerings of broken machetes and blackened masks. The Inquisition tried to exterminate them, but for every sect burned, two more appeared. Their chants echoed across the stars. He is the stillness after war, the cold that never fades, the blade that will not rust. And sometimes, in the ashes of their massacres, investigators found something impossible, a single footprint, deep and heavy, burned into the soil. Jason Voorhees had transcended myth. He had become the shape of death in a galaxy that already worshipped it. And somewhere beyond the stars, perhaps even he began to sense what was coming, the inevitable convergence between his eternal silence and the gods who demanded that silence be broken. The silence that followed Jason's rampage across the halo stars rippled through the warp like a dead echo. It was not a sound, but an absence, a wound so void of psychic resonance that even demons hesitated to cross it. For the first time in memory, chaos itself recoiled. Across the immaterial sea, the great powers of the warp gathered in observation. Khorne raged at the insult of a killer who shed oceans of blood without tribute. Tzeentch whispered theories that Jason was an anomaly, a paradox born of time fracture, an event unpredicted by even his infinite schemes. Nurgle, in his rotting garden, chuckled with amusement, calling Jason a beautiful stagnation, a creature of pure rot without renewal. Slanesh merely smiled, savoring the exquisite simplicity of unending violence without pleasure. But among all the chaos gods, it was Khorne who took this as a challenge. In the depths of his crimson throne, surrounded by the skulls of slain demigods, the blood god bellowed, "No mortal slaughters without my mark." And so, Khorne sent forth an avatar, a champion wrapped in baroque armor of blood and brass, armed with a demon axe forged from the heart of a dying star. This chosen warrior descended upon a feral world, scarred by Jason's passing. His purpose was simple: to claim the unkillable one in Khorne's name, or destroy him. When the Avatar landed, he found a wasteland of silence. No wind, no life. Only the faint scent of iron in the air. He marched for hours before seeing movement, a shadow amid the ruins, dragging something heavy behind it. Jason Voorhees stepped into view. His mask was shattered on one side, revealing a sliver of dead flesh. His machete glowed faintly, humming with residual necrodermis energy. He stopped. The Avatar of Khorne roared his name, not Jason's, but the title mortals had given him, the Silent Death. "Fight, mortal," the champion bellowed. "Spill blood in the blood god's honor." Jason tilted his head. No reply, only slow, deliberate movement forward. The champion charged. The ground split beneath his boots. His axe came down with the force of a meteor, and Jason caught it with one hand. The demonic weapon screamed, as if struck by its own reflection. Sparks burst. Metal met flesh, and the flesh did not yield. Jason swung his machete once, cleaving through the champion's armor. The blow should have been impossible, yet the blade cut through like glass through smoke. The Avatar howled, struck back, and the world trembled. For days, they fought, a god's chosen and a revenant who refused to die. Each blow carved craters into the land. Each drop of blood fed the soil. And still, Jason made no sound. On the third day, the sky itself cracked. The Avatar of Khorne fell, bisected from shoulder to hip. His demon weapon splintered into molten fragments. Jason stood over the corpse, breathing slow, steady breaths. The warp screamed in rage, and far beyond the battlefield, in his throne of skulls, Khorne fell silent. For the first time in eternity, his endless fury paused, not in defeat, but in recognition. He understood now, Jason Voorhees was not a rival. He was a reflection, the purest expression of killing, without passion, without honor, without purpose. Khorne, ever the god of absolutes, laughed a thunder that shook realities. Then let him kill. Let him spill blood without name. He honors me more than my followers ever could. From that moment, Jason's existence was no longer an affront to the blood god. It was sanctified. The rivers of blood he spilled became silent prayers to an unknowing deity. But in the material realm, his legend only grew darker. Imperial commanders began reporting strange phenomena following large-scale battles. Entire war zones went eerily still. Vox signals dead, motion sensors blank. Search parties sent afterward found the same thing every time. Thousands of corpses, weapons untouched, and a single figure standing among them. A man in a cracked white mask. He did not flee. He did not vanish into the shadows. He simply waited, motionless, until orbital bombardment erased the field. Yet even then, when the ashes cooled, someone always found the mask. And still, the Ordo Malleus could not classify him. On Terra, in the shadowed halls of the Inquisition, Grand Inquisitor Veritas convened a conclave. Psychic projectors displayed fragmented footage from multiple battlefields, all showing the same entity, the same shape, the same silence. "He is not demonic," said one. "He is not machine," said another. Then what is he? Veritas, a man who had seen gods die and heresies born, said only this: he is entropy made flesh. Meanwhile, deep beneath Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus conducted one last forbidden experiment. A magos biologist named Solara believed that Jason's cellular structure could hold the key to immortality, not through cloning, but through stasis. If she could understand what bound his soul to his flesh, she could achieve what even the Emperor's scientists could not. The experiment began with a fragment, a shard of Jason's mask, recovered from a burned-out battlefield. The Mechanicus attempted to dissolve it in plasma. The plasma dimmed. They exposed it to void radiation. The mask regenerated. They tried to disassemble it, molecule by molecule. The machine broke. Then, on the seventh day, the containment alarms blared. The lights went dark. When the acolytes restored power, the chamber was empty. Only a single footprint remained, and a trail of wet blood leading out into the Martian tunnels. The Magos was never found, but her final log was preserved, broadcast through encrypted Vox frequencies. He cannot be studied. He studies us. Death does not chase him. It follows him, like a pet. From that day forward, the Mechanicus declared a standing decree. Any relic, organic or synthetic, connected to the entity codenamed Voorhees was to be destroyed on sight. And yet, destruction meant nothing, because Jason could not die. He appeared again on Krieg during the final assault on a Chaos siege line. Witnesses described him walking through artillery fire, bullets carving through his flesh and sealing seconds later. The Death Corps soldiers, veterans who had stared into the eyes of demons, simply stopped fighting. Some thought he was the Emperor's spirit, come to punish them for surviving too long. He killed both sides, Chaos and Imperial alike. And when it was done, when the battlefield was silent, he dragged his machete through the mud and disappeared into the fog. Jason Voorhees had become more than a horror story. He was an inevitability, a manifestation of the one truth that the galaxy, for all its gods and wars, could never escape. Death does not need a reason. And as the Inquisition scrambled to contain this spreading curse, one whispered fear began to take hold among even the most faithful. What if Jason could never be stopped? Because he had never truly begun. In the darkest corners of Imperial archives, buried beneath centuries of forbidden knowledge, there existed one heretical theory whispered only among the oldest of the Inquisition's scribes, that Jason Voorhees was not born of Earth, nor created by chaos, but rather an echo from the void before time, a remnant of that first violent spark when existence itself tore apart nothingness, a fracture that had taken the shape of a man. But the Imperium, bound by faith and fear, refused such blasphemy. They called it superstition, even as new reports surfaced across dozens of sectors. A silent figure, walking unharmed through lasgun fire. Entire squads of Astartes disappearing without trace. Battlefields reduced to red silence. The truth was impossible to deny. Jason was moving across the galaxy, not at random, but towards something. The Inquisition could not discern what. On the hive world of Solcaris Prime, millions toiled under the smog of endless industry. When the alarms began, power outages, worker riots, mass disappearances, local enforcers assumed it was rebellion. But as the darkness spread, picked recordings captured the impossible. A single figure moving through the hive's underlevels, step by step, ignoring walls, fire, bullets. Security feeds flickered, static screamed, and in every frame before the systems died, that same mask, that same machete. When the Arbites arrived hours later, they found nothing alive, only echoes of gunfire and the faint dripping of water from the pipes. The Adeptus Administratum sealed the planet and declared it lost to rebellion. But the Inquisition knew better. Jason Voorhees had walked through one of the largest hive cities in the Imperium and killed everything. The question was why. On Titan, the Grey Knights assembled in full strength for the first time in centuries. The Supreme Grand Master himself stood before a holographic projection of the masked killer. Around him, psychic auguries burned, their light pulsing like heartbeats. "Can a thing that is not of the warp kill demons?" one asked. "It has," replied another, "and it has killed the faithful too. It chooses no side." A silence settled. Then the Grand Master spoke. Then it must be ended. Not banished. Ended, for the first time, the Grey Knights prepared to face something that had no psychic signature. Something they could not exercise or contain. The hunt began on the fringe world of Erebos 7, a desolate moon scarred by ancient wars. The knights descended, their silver armor gleaming beneath black skies, their minds shielded by faith and psychic purity. Jason was waiting. The first contact was brutal. The Grey Knight's storm bolters tore through him, and he fell. They advanced, chanting blessings, surrounding the corpse. But when one knight bent to retrieve the mask, the body moved. Slowly. Jason's hand shot up, piercing power armor as if it were flesh. The knight's scream echoed as his soul was ripped from his body, not devoured, not corrupted, simply erased. The squad opened fire again. Psychic lightning, warp-charged flame, consecrated steel. None of it mattered. Jason rose through the storm, machete flashing, cutting through relic blades that had slain demons. He felt no pain, no fury, no purpose, only movement. When the last Grey Knight fell, the moon itself shuddered. The psychic feedback of their deaths surged through the warp. But instead of fueling chaos, it vanished into nothing. Their souls simply ceased. From that point forward, every psychic seer who tried to locate Jason found only silence. It was as though he existed outside the currents of fate, a void within a void. And that silence drew attention from a far older power. On the edge of the galaxy, where reality thinned into the cold, mechanical logic of tomb worlds, the Necron overlord, Imhotep the Stormlord, watched the data unfold. To the Necrons, Jason was not a ghost or a demon. He was an error, a living organism that resisted entropy and time, the very forces the Necrons had conquered. Intrigued, Imhotep sent an entire phalanx to capture him. They descended on a barren asteroid belt, deploying their monolithic constructs with surgical precision. Jason was found walking across the surface of one asteroid, slowly dragging his machete across the rock, carving deep lines as though marking something unseen. The Necrons surrounded him, weapons raised, and then impossibly, their systems began to fail. Sensors blinked, targeting matrices glitched. The Overlord's command protocols distorted into static. One by one, the warriors turned their gas weapons on each other, shredding themselves into dust. Jason didn't move. When the last Necron fell, Jason simply turned and walked away, leaving behind a ruin of machines that had unmade themselves. To the Necrons, this was blasphemy beyond comprehension. A biological being that could corrupt perfection. A creature that could not be categorized, computed, or annihilated. Some began to whisper, in their cold, mechanical way, that he was the embodiment of error, the one anomaly their equations could never erase. Meanwhile, on the daemon world of Sycorax, the Chaos Gods convened again. The warp churned with disquiet. Jason Voorhees had slain both mortal and demon Necron, and Night, and now the warp itself seemed to recoil where he walked. "He weakens us," Tzeentch hissed. "Every soul he kills, every psychic death, it does not return to the flow." "He kills what belongs to me," Slaanesh snarled. "Good," Khorne boomed, his laughter shaking eternity. "Let him kill more." But even Khorne's amusement faltered when Jason's silence began to seep into the Imperium itself. Small rifts began to die, collapsing into stillness, vanishing entirely. Lesser demons disappeared. Even some greater ones found themselves unable to reform. Jason's existence wasn't just defying the warp, it was erasing it. And then the unthinkable happened. One day, on a battlefield at the edge of the Cicatrix Maledictum, a rift tore open, and from it stepped a demon prince of colossal size, roaring defiance at reality. Behind it, an army of cultists screamed their devotion to chaos, and Jason Voorhees was already there. He walked into their midst without haste. The demon struck him with claws of warp-forged energy, tearing him in half, and yet he rose again, again, until the demon hesitated. Jason's machete cleaved upward, splitting the creature from chest to crown. The demon prince screamed, not in pain, but in fear. Its form dissolved into mist. And then, nothing. Not even residue. No warp echo, no trace of its existence. Jason had killed it so completely that not even the warp remembered it had ever been. For the first time in recorded history, something had deleted a demon from the fabric of reality. From that moment, Jason Voorhees became the Great Unmaking, a walking void that erased not just life, but existence itself. He was no longer bound to planets or places. He began appearing in the warp and the material realm simultaneously, crossing between them as though the barrier no longer existed. To the Imperium, this was the final omen. The prophecy of the Silent Reaper, a figure who would walk when the stars began to fade, had come true. Jason was no longer hunting, he was undoing, and the galaxy, for all its gods and monsters, had no idea what would happen when his silence finally reached the Golden Throne. Across the frozen wastes of Valhalla, the story of the Crimson Lake Massacre had spread like wildfire. Entire platoons of the Astra Militarum whispered the name Voorhees as if it were a curse, spoken only when the Emperor's light was faint, when the wind howled too much like screams. The Valhallans had seen horrors before, but never like this. Bodies found split apart cleanly, not by lass fire or claw, but by something primitive, and always the sound of water dripping nearby. The Inquisition had already taken interest. Inquisitor Calthrix, Ordo Malleus, arrived on Valhalla with his retinue of psychers and death cult assassins. His ship's augurs detected strange warp fluctuations around the frozen lake where the first massacres occurred. To the Inquisitor, it was simple, either a demon or a warp anomaly. But when he descended to the planet and saw the scene with his own eyes, even his iron will faltered. Blood had frozen mid-spray. Corpses were arranged in grotesque patterns, shapes that seemed meaningless until viewed from above, forming a crude symbol resembling the number 13. And deep beneath the ice, the psychers could hear whispers, not words, not language, just hatred. Calthrix ordered the area sealed, but within hours, his command post was attacked. A sentry went missing, then another. The thermal sensors detected nothing alive, yet one by one, men vanished into the snow. When they found the first body, it had been pinned to an ice wall with a jagged shard of metal. The Inquisitor activated his Auspex, scanning for signs of demon presence. But what he found was more unsettling. It wasn't warp energy, but psychic residue unlike anything recorded. Something old, something human. A rage so pure it burned through the barriers of reality itself. Jason Voorhees had adapted, no longer bound to one lake or one world. He was now an echo of vengeance, imprinted on the Imperium. He didn't need to breathe, sleep, or think. He existed only to continue the pattern. Punishment, death, silence. The warp had taken his obsession and turned it into an elemental constant. On Valhalla, his presence began to warp the environment. The lake no longer thawed, even under orbital bombardment. The temperature dropped to levels that killed machinery and men alike. And when the full moon rose, shapes moved beneath the ice. Humanoid, dozens of them, like reflections trapped in frozen glass. Calthrix, desperate to end the horror, called for the Grey Knights. When the strike cruiser Sanctus Divinus arrived, the knights descended without hesitation. They were the Emperor's chosen demon slayers, armored in psychic wards and faith unbreakable. But even they, as they neared the lake, began to hear something in the wind, metal scraping against metal. Brother Captain Garen led the first team into the frozen tunnels beneath the surface. Their Auspex readings went haywire. Energy spikes, temperature shifts, auditory hallucinations. Then came the screams. One by one, their vital signs blinked out. The feed from Garen's helmet cam showed it clearly before static consumed the transmission. A shadow emerging from the ice. Massive, slow, unstoppable. Garen unleashed a storm of Psy-cannon fire, rounds blessed to destroy demons, but they merely tore chunks of ice and flesh that healed seconds later. Then the thing lunged, and the feed ended in crimson static. Calthrix ordered orbital purification, but the Grey Knights refused to withdraw. "If it bleeds, it dies," said Brother Stern, invoking the Emperor's light as he led the next strike. They found Garen's body crucified on a jagged outcrop, helm crushed, Rosarius shattered. And beside him, carved into the ice, were symbols, primitive, Terran, but familiar to the Inquisitor's archives. The numbers, 1957, the year Jason Voorhees had drowned. The realization struck like lightning. The Inquisitor's mind raced through forbidden records. The dark age of technology, old Earth's hidden myths, archived entertainment files long sealed by the Administratum. Jason Voorhees, a child drowned in a lake, a vengeful revenant tied to cycles of violence. A legend that somehow the warp had remembered. The Emperor's Imperium was vast beyond imagination. Countless worlds, endless wars. And yet across all of that, the warp had plucked a single mortal soul from the forgotten past and amplified his curse into something cosmic. On the bridge of the Sanctus Divinus, Calthrix gave the order no Inquisitor ever wished to utter. Exterminatus. Valhalla's skies ignited with fire. Orbital torpedoes rained upon the planet, turning the frozen wastes into seas of molten glass. The warp signature dissipated, silence returned. For a moment, it seemed Jason Voorhees was gone. But as the ashes cooled, somewhere far away, in another sector entirely, the world of Krieg reported strange disappearances near its flooded trenches. Soldiers claimed to see a masked figure standing in the mist, cleaver in hand, unmoving, unblinking. The Mechanicus took interest next. Tech priests theorized that Jason's psychic pattern wasn't random. It behaved like a virus, a mimetic echo spreading through warp frequencies. They dubbed it the Curse of Crystal Lake. And though they sought to contain it, they only accelerated its spread. Every time someone spoke the name Jason Voorhees, the warp seemed to notice. Inquisitor Calthrix, now haunted by dreams of dripping water and blood, became convinced that Jason wasn't a person anymore. He was a reaction, a self-perpetuating punishment. The warp had found in him the perfect avatar of fear, an unstoppable force that punished sin, guilt, and defiance in equal measure. Soon reports came from Cadia, from Necromunda, from hive worlds where superstition ran deep. Whole underhives whispered of a masked ghost appearing when too many lives were taken unjustly. Some cults began to worship him as a form of divine retribution, the silent judge. The ecclesiarchy declared such worship heresy, but secretly, even priests began to pray for Jason's appearance in places overrun by heretics or mutants. Wherever he appeared, the killing stopped, because there was no one left alive to continue it. By now, the Inquisition realized the truth. Exterminatus could not destroy him. The warp would simply reform his essence elsewhere. Drawn to violence like iron to a magnet, he was eternal, unkillable, unrepentant. Inquisitor Calthrix recorded his final log before his mind broke. We have awakened something primal, an echo of old night. Jason Voorhees is no longer a man, nor a demon, nor a ghost. He is the punishment humanity has always feared. He is silence after the scream, judgment after the sin. The galaxy does not understand yet, but soon it will. He is coming for all of us. As the transmission ended, the camera caught something behind him, a shadow in the reflection of steel, a shape wearing a cracked hockey mask. The feed went black, and in the warp, something stirred again. The story of Jason Voorhees was no longer bound to one universe or one reality. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, there would now also be vengeance. There are forces in the galaxy that even the gods themselves dare not awaken. But Jason Voorhees was not awakened. He persisted. Across the long night of the 41st millennium, his curse spread like a slow infection, a whisper drifting from one system to another. He had become something greater than a myth and far more terrifying than a demon. On hive worlds, where millions lived and died in the same hour, stories of the silent killer emerged, a masked figure that appeared whenever cruelty or corruption reached its peak. Overseers who starved workers to death would vanish overnight, their bodies later discovered hanging upside down over vats of promethium, their faces frozen in terror. The Adeptus Arbites tried to suppress the tales, but the fear only grew stronger. Fear, after all, feeds the warp. Each whispered retelling gave Jason more strength, more reality. He was not summoned through ritual, but through memory. The human race, spread across 1,000,000 worlds, carried the echo of their ancient myths in their collective unconscious. And within that vast psychic sea, Jason Voorhees thrived like a parasite, feeding on guilt. Even the Chaos Gods took notice. In the Imperium, where madness is law and emotion is flesh, Khorne, the blood god, felt something unusual, a presence that reeked of slaughter, but not of worship. Jason killed without glory, without hate, without offering his kills to any master. His murders were not tributes, they were inevitabilities. To Khorne, that made him an abomination, a being who embodied killing without purpose. Slaanesh found no pleasure in his violence. Tzeentch could not predict his movements, and even Nurgle felt unease in his constancy. He was neither demon nor mortal, but something that existed in defiance of all categories, a being too simple to corrupt, too relentless to control. In the eye of terror, demons began to whisper his name like a prayer of dread. They said he walked between the stars, not as a warp entity, but as a shadow that even demons feared to cross. When Khorne's legions marched upon a world steeped in blood, sometimes they found the killing already done. skulls shattered, flesh flayed, but no trophies taken. The mark of the machete was unmistakable. The Chaos Gods, for all their might, could not unmake him. For Jason Voorhees was born not of divine design, but of human sin. On the imperial frontier, where faith is the only shield against despair, the ecclesiarchy attempted to reclaim his legend. Preachers began to reinterpret Jason as an angel of the emperor's wrath, a spirit sent to punish the wicked. Sermons described him as the emperor's silent blade, and on some worlds, his visage appeared in cathedral murals, painted beside the imperial saints. But the truth was far darker. Jason did not serve the emperor. He served nothing at all. Inquisitor Calthrix's final transmission spread through the hidden channels of the Inquisition. Those who studied his recordings began to notice patterns. Every planet that suffered Jason's presence shared one trait: the same time dilation near psychic events. The warp around him didn't behave as normal. It collapsed. Jason was a paradox. He did not exist in the warp, yet his influence spread through it. He could appear on worlds light years apart within seconds, bypassing the need for ships or portals. He was neither alive nor dead, and because of that, the laws of reality no longer applied to him. The Ordo Malleus theorized that Jason Voorhees represented a new kind of phenomenon: psychic anchors, entities born from collective trauma that grow stronger the more they are remembered. In the same way that the Chaos Gods are powered by emotion, Jason was powered by fear itself. But unlike demons, he did not fade when forgotten. He waited. The Grey Knights conducted one final test. They baited Jason's presence by recreating the environment of his origin: a man-made lake beneath a cathedral on Titan, filled with frozen water imported from Valhalla. They seeded the area with psychic energy and forbidden relics, hoping to draw him out. And he came. No alarms, no warp rifts, just silence. A Grey Knight librarian named Atheon was the first to see him, standing waist-deep in the water, motionless, the cracked mask reflecting starlight. Atheon's psychic wards should have burned him away instantly, but Jason moved through them like smoke. Bolt of fire did nothing. Psychic fire seared him, but didn't slow him. Even a force sword through the chest barely staggered him. When Atheon struck again, Jason caught the blade mid-swing and snapped it in half with his bare hand. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. When the other Grey Knights arrived, Atheon was gone. Only his armor remained, still standing upright in the water as if its occupant had simply vanished. The Inquisition ordered the site sealed. No records were ever made public. But in the secret archives of the Ordo Malleus, one line was added to the forbidden codices. Subject designation: Voorhees anomaly. Status: uncontainable. Nature: retributive. Possible proto-godhood event. Years passed. The galaxy burned. Armageddon, Cadia, the Indomitus Crusade, the endless wars of man and demon. Through it all, there were always whispers of a figure, appearing amid the carnage, always in places where horror had reached its peak. Some said he appeared on chaos-held worlds, where he tore through heretic warbands with unstoppable brutality. Others claimed he was seen on corrupted imperial vessels, walking the blood-slick corridors until no one remained alive. In the far reaches of space, a Necron cryptech once recorded an anomaly on a dead world, a humanoid form cutting through layers of necrodermis with physical weapons that should have shattered on contact. The cryptech tried to analyze its quantum signature and found nothing, no record of its existence before or after that moment. Even the Tyranids avoided worlds where Jason appeared. Their hive minds registered something unnatural, something their collective instinct rejected. They simply moved on, leaving the planet untouched. Jason Voorhees had become what humanity's worst fears always hinted at: inevitability. He was not chaos, he was not order, he was the punishment that lay beyond both. And so, in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, one constant remains: not even gods are safe from retribution. Somewhere beneath the void skies of a nameless moon, a campfire burns beside a dark lake that has no end. The water is still, the stars do not move, and beside that lake, a figure sits quietly, sharpening a blood-stained machete. He does not speak, he does not think, he simply waits. For in a galaxy that will never know peace, Jason Voorhees has found his true home. The Warhammer 40,000 universe has countless monsters, but none so human and none so eternal.